Magnus Erlendson, Earl of Orkney, was no ordinary Viking. While his kin ruled with iron fists, Magnus stood apart, guided by faith, wisdom, and an unyielding desire for peace. His journey from warrior to martyr transformed him into one of the most beloved saints of the North. But how did this peaceful earl survive in a world defined by ruthless battles and clan rivalries? Did he truly eschew violence, or was he a shrewd strategist, skillfully navigating the brutal politics of his time to achieve his goals? And what dark forces led to his shocking and violent end, betrayed and killed by his own cousin? Join me as we uncover the remarkable life of Magnus Erlendson, the Viking earl who became a saint. This is History with Magnus, literally and figuratively. Buckle up for double the Magnus. But before we begin, remember to smash that subscribe button as if you were a Viking berserker attacking Paris. Saint Magnus Erlendson, Earl of Orkney, also known as Magnus the Martyr, held the title of Earl of Orkney from around 1100 until 1117. Orkney, like Shetland, fell under Norse rule during the Viking Age, becoming a critical point along the sea routes of the Norsemen. Magnus came from a distinguished lineage. His grandparents, Thorfinn the mighty Jarl of Orkney and Ingebjorg, Finn's daughter, had two sons, the twin brothers Erlend and Paul. The family was closely connected to Norwegian royalty, including Kings Olav and Harald II. Magnus was the eldest son of Erlend Thorfinnsson, who jointly ruled Orkney with his brother Paul. Though Erlend and Paul maintained a peaceful relationship in their early years of rule, tensions arose as their children reached adulthood. Magnus's cousins, Hakon Paulson and Erling Erlendson, were both ambitious, quarrelsome, and arrogant. In contrast, Magnus was regarded as a quiet and thoughtful man. Hakon, proud of his high birth, sought to be recognized as the leading figure among his kin, while Erling was equally determined to assert his position. The rivalry between the cousins created a rift that even their fathers struggled to mend. Although Paul and Erlend tried to negotiate a resolution, it was clear that each favored his own son. Eventually, the tension led to the division of Orkney into two separate territories, splitting the earldom. According to the Orkney saga, Magnus Erlendson was renowned for his piety and gentleness, qualities that many Norwegians saw as cowardice. During a Viking raid on Anglesey in Wales, Magnus refused to fight in the Battle of Menai Straits, citing his religious beliefs. Instead, he remained on board his ship, singing psalms as the battle raged. Historian Barbara E. Crawford, in her book Saint Magnus and Saint Rognvald, recounts the Norwegian King Magnus barefoot, incredulously questioning Magnus for sitting on his laurels during such a crucial moment. Magnus calmly responded, explaining he had no quarrel with the king's enemies. "That's why I've no intention of fighting." As the saga portrays it, Magnus's faith guided his refusal to shed blood, but when a more skeptical voice questioned his courage, suggesting faith had nothing to do with it, Magnus shot back, humiliating the man. This bold act of defiance may have been more than an expression of faith. It might have been politically motivated. Magnus was said to have connections with Scotland, and it's likely his refusal to fight wasn't just a rejection of bloodshed, but a rejection of Norway's royal authority over the Orkney Islands. His defiance could be seen as a strategic move, distancing himself from Norwegian dominance. Or maybe he just liked men in short skirts. As Crawford writes, Magnus Erlendson was a very unordinary young man who deliberately went against the oath of loyalty he had given his king. In medieval times, disloyalty was one of the most unforgivable acts, and Magnus's behavior went beyond mere disobedience. He had joined the royal expedition and held a place of honor in the king's household, only to respond with what Crawford calls a gratuitous insult. Magnus's daring defiance forced him into exile for nearly 7 years. He escaped Norway's reach after King Magnus Erlendson's death, which ended Norwegian dominance over Orkney. Magnus returned to Orkney in 1105 and immediately clashed with his cousin Hakon over the succession. When negotiations failed, Magnus sought help from King Eystein I of Norway, who ultimately granted him the Earldom of Orkney. Magnus went on to share the Earldom of Orkney with his cousin Hakon, but their rivalry ultimately led to Magnus's brutal death. Eventually, the followers of the two earls fell out, and the sides met at the Thing Assembly on the Orkney mainland. Peace was negotiated, and the earls arranged to meet each other on the island of Egilsay at Easter, each bringing only 2 ships. Magnus arrived with his 2 ships, but then Hakon treacherously turned up with 4 times as many, 8 ships in total. Magnus escaped and took refuge in the island's church overnight, but the following day he was captured and offered to go into exile or prison. However, an assembly of chieftains, tired of joint rule, insisted that Magnus must die. But the executioner, Hakon's standard-bearer, Othayr, refused to execute Magnus. An angry Hakon ordered his cook Leifulf to kill his cousin. As Leifulf wept, Magnus offered absolution to his executioner. "Be not afraid, for you do this against your will, and he who forces you sins more than you do." Magnus had one last request, that he be given a noble death. "Stand thou before me, and hew on my head a great wound, for it is not seemly to behead chiefs like thieves." With that, Leifulf struck his head with an axe, splitting it in 2, killing him instantly. Magnus Erlendson was buried on the spot where he died. When the Orkneyinga saga was first transcribed, Hakon Pálsson's grandson Harald Madadsson held the title of Earl of Orkney. It seems that the saga's writer grappled with the task of depicting the controversial killing of Magnus. Historians suggest that the assembly of the Thing where Magnus and Hakon was told to meet each other later may have been either fabricated or exaggerated to shift some of the blame from Hakon for what in reality was an execution of his own kin. Following Magnus's murder, extraordinary events began to unfold. The saga describes the murder site as initially rocky and overgrown, but it soon transformed into lush, verdant land. On the day of Magnus's burial, a brilliant, holy light, accompanied by a heavenly fragrance, was said to have appeared above his grave. Numerous miracles were reported at his burial site, including the remarkable recovery of Bishop William the Old, who, after being struck blind in his cathedral, regained his sight only after praying at Magnus's grave. Later, Magnus's mother, Thora, petitioned Hakon to allow her son to be buried in a church. Hakon consented, and Magnus was interred at Christ Church in Beersay. In 1136, Bishop William of Orkney consecrated the murdered Earl Magnus, officially canonizing him as Saint Magnus. Shortly thereafter, on the island of Egilsay, near the site of Magnus's murder, the Saint Magnus Church was built in his honor. Magnus's nephew, Rognvald Kali Kulsum, sought to claim the Earldom of Orkney. Guided by his father Cole's advice, Rognvald vowed to construct a grand stone minster at Kirkwall in memory of his saintly uncle. This promise materialized into what we now know as St. Magnus Cathedral. When the cathedral was completed and ready for consecration, the relics of St. Magnus were moved to the church. During restoration work in 1919, a hidden cavity was discovered within a column. Inside, archaeologists found a box containing bones, including a damaged skull, which are widely believed to be the relics of St. Magnus. These remains were reburied in the pillar in 1926, with their location marked by a cross. This is not the only church named in his honor, because in total, there are 21 churches in Europe dedicated to St. Magnus. The beatification of nobles often served political purposes, allowing the surviving family members to leverage these events for their advantage. By portraying Magnus as a peaceful martyr, they reinforced their prominent status in Orkney. Their strategy proved successful when Rognvald Kallikolsson, Magnus's nephew, became Earl of Orkney in 1136. The family's rule effectively ended in the late 12th century, when the last direct descendant died. Magnus Erlendson's legacy lives on, and his journey from warrior to martyr is a truly fascinating one, and his legacy continues to be honored in the Orkney Islands. And on April 16th every year, they celebrate Saint Magnus Day, the date that marks the martyrdom of Magnus Erlendson. Remember to smash that subscribe button and put on all notifications so you don't miss my next video about history. And while you are at it, why not also give this video a like? It really helps out with the algorithms. And I hope to see you in the next one.